He had everything money could buy, except peace. A cold billionaire with no faith in humanity, accustomed to giving orders and controlling people. But on that rainy night, something happened that would change her life forever. When he opened the car door, he found a girl sleeping in the back seat. His maid's daughter, dirty, frightened, and with a look he would never forget. Before he could say anything, she opened her eyes and whispered, "I dreamt that you were going to save us." But what Caleb didn't know was that the dream was actually a desperate cry for help. And what would come next, no one could ever have imagined. The clock was nearing midnight when Caleb Stone parked his car in the silent garage of his mansion. The light rain reflected off the white lights on the marble floor, creating small rivers that snaked between the tires. Exhausted, he turned off the engine, closed his eyes for a moment, and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his own isolation. Then, a slight movement in the rearview mirror made him freeze. There was someone there, a small silhouette, leaning against the back seat. He cautiously opened the door and, illuminating the interior, saw a sleeping girl huddled under a torn blanket. Caleb's heart raced, not with fear, but with confusion. The little girl looked exhausted, her face stained with dried tears and her feet bare. He approached hesitantly and touched her shoulder. She awoke, startled, but instead of screaming, she looked at him with a serenity that disconcerted him. "I dreamed that you were going to save us," she whispered. The phrase hit him like a punch. "What?" Caleb murmured, unsure whether to laugh or worry. Before he could ask more questions, footsteps echoed down the garage hallway. Helena, his maid, appeared pale, her eyes desperate. "My God, Lucia, I've been looking everywhere for you." She fell to her knees, hugging the girl tightly. Caleb took a step back, still trying to understand what was happening. Helena began to apologize, the words coming out between sobs. She said that her daughter should have hidden in the car without her noticing. Caleb just watched, with the cold expression of someone who doesn't want to get involved. But the girl's voice continued to echo in his mind. "I dreamt that you were going to save us." He didn't know what it was or why, but something about that sentence seemed like a premonition. Before Caleb discovers the real reason behind this mysterious encounter, I want to ask you something. If this story has touched you in any way, please subscribe to the channel now, because here, every story has the power to remind you that even on the coldest nights, there's always a chance to start over. The following morning, the mansion was strangely silent. Caleb, sitting at the breakfast table, leafed through the newspaper without really reading. Hearing light footsteps, he looked up. Lucia was there, her hair wet and wearing an oversized blouse. "Can I get some bread?" she asked casually. He nodded, surprised by the girl's calmness. Helena appeared soon after, embarrassed, apologizing again. She said she didn't mean to cause trouble, but Caleb interrupted her with a gesture. "Why did she say that yesterday, that I was going to save them?" he asked, fixing his gaze on her. Helena paled, looking away. "She daydreams a lot. She says nonsensical things, that's all." But her trembling tone betrayed the opposite.
As the conversation drew to a close, Lucia watched the two of them in silence, as if she understood more than she let on. Caleb, intrigued, finished his coffee and went up to his office, determined to forget the incident. However, when he looked out the window, he saw Helena and the garden, speaking nervously on the phone. There was fear in every gesture, in every glance cast toward the gates. That night, Caleb found her quietly crying in the kitchen. This time she couldn't hide it. "Lucia and we're running away from someone," she confessed, her voice choked with emotion. "Please don't tell anyone." He stared at her in silence, his face impassive, but his heart racing. Running away? From whom? Why? Helena didn't reveal any details, only that a dangerous man was stalking them and her daughter was in danger. Caleb stood there, motionless, while the weight of the situation slowly seeped into his mind. When he returned to the room, he looked out the window and saw Lucia playing with a stuffed cat. For a moment, the loneliness that surrounded him seemed to dissolve, and he wondered if that dream wasn't, in fact, a cry for help. The following days brought an unsettling silence to the mansion. Caleb watched Helena and Lucia with restrained curiosity, without admitting to himself that something held him captive to those two fragile figures. One night, while he was working in the office, she heard a noise in the kitchen. Going downstairs, she found Helena sitting at the table, her hands trembling over a cup of cold coffee. "I can't sleep," she said, without looking up. Caleb stood still for a moment, undecided between ignoring her and listening. "What happened to you two, Helena?" he asked. Helena hesitated, her eyes welling up with tears. "I tried to run away from him, from Marcus. He was cruel. When he found out I was leaving, he vowed to hunt me down until the end." Her voice was a whisper of despair. Caleb felt a weight in his chest. He knew this kind of fear, not the same, but the fear of loss and helplessness. "Why didn't you go to the police?" he asked. Helena shook her head, her lips trembling. "He has connections, people with money, influence. If I reported him, we would die." The silence that followed was almost suffocating. The rain began to fall again, and Caleb watched the reflection of the drops running down the window. Part of him wanted to walk away. This wasn't his problem. But something in that woman's pain reminded him of his own deceased wife and of everything he couldn't save. "No one will touch you here," he said in a firm voice. Helena stared at him in surprise, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You don't need to get involved." "I'm not getting involved. I'm just saying that as long as they're under this roof, they'll be safe." He went upstairs soon after, but the echo of his own words followed him to the bedroom, like a silent commitment he never planned to make.
Dawn brought a deceptive calm. Lucia ran through the garden, playing with the family cat, while Helena tried to resume her cleaning routine. Caleb watched from the balcony, distracted, when the intercom rang. No visitors were expected. The security guard over the radio announced, "Sir, something was left at the entrance." A brown envelope with no return address. When Caleb opened it, his blood ran cold. Inside was a recent photo of Helena and Lucia, taken outside the mansion, and a handwritten note. "You can't hide forever." He called Helena immediately. Upon seeing the photo, she paled and brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. "He found us," she murmured. Caleb felt his old instinct for self-preservation take over. His first impulse was to send the two girls away, to protect himself, to avoid trouble. But when he looked at Lucia, playing, oblivious to the danger, something inside him wavered. The girl looked at him and smiled, as if she blindly trusted in her strength. That completely disarmed him. He reinforced security, ordered the cameras to be checked, and had the gate codes changed. Helena watched in silence, trying to thank him, but Caleb wouldn't listen. "It's not for you," he said coldly. "I don't want criminals lurking around me." But even he knew he was lying. That night, as he walked through the hallways, Caleb stopped before the guest room where Lucia slept. The door was ajar, and the dim light of the bedside lamp illuminated the girl's serene face. She held the cat and murmured something in her sleep.
A prayer, perhaps. For the first time in years, Caleb felt something inside him stir, and he realized that, without realizing it, he was already too involved to turn back. Tension grew like an invisible shadow within the mansion. Caleb was trying to maintain the routine, but his mind was always on the menacing envelope. Helena avoided eye contact, and Lucia sensed the weight in the air, though she tried to feign normalcy. During coffee, the billionaire observed the silence between mother and daughter, a silence that spoke volumes. One night, Lucia quietly entered his office. "Can I stay here a little while?" she asked, hugging her stuffed cat. Caleb looked at her, surprised by her courage. "Are you scared?" The girl nodded slowly. "Mommy cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. And you seem sad too." The childlike sincerity struck him unexpectedly. He tried to change the subject, but Lucia continued. "In my dream, you were with us. You weren't afraid, but you seemed alone." Caleb fell silent, staring out the window. The rain was falling again, and he saw his reflection in the glass, a cold and isolated figure. "Sometimes fear is what keeps us alive," he replied, almost to himself. The girl approached and placed the stuffed cat on the table. "For you, sir. It helps me sleep." Caleb smiled for the first time in a long time, a restrained, almost shy smile. When she left, silence returned to fill the space, but this time the emptiness felt different. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He walked the hallways, remembering his wife, the void her death had left, and the promise he had never kept to never get attached again. Now a child and a woman with a tainted past were there, and, against all logic, he felt responsible for them. Dawn brought a pale light that flooded Caleb's room. He went down to the garden and found Lucia observing an old portrait in the living room, a woman with a sweet gaze and serene expression. "She's beautiful," the girl said. Caleb nodded, a lump in his throat. "She was my wife." Lucia turned, curious. "What happened to her?" He hesitated, his voice choked with emotion. "An accident, 5 years ago." The girl was silent for a few seconds, then whispered, "She must be with God, and you'll see her again, you know." Caleb took a deep breath, trying to contain the emotion that threatened to escape. The presence of that child seemed to reopen wounds and at the same time heal them. During lunch, Helena observed her boss with a confused expression. The cold man she once feared now seemed human. "Is Lucia bothering you?" she asked, uncertain. Caleb simply replied, "No, she has made this house breathe again." That afternoon, he found an old folder stored in his office, documents from the charitable foundation his wife had planned to create before she died. The project had been abandoned, shelved by grief and selfishness. Caleb ran his fingers over the unfinished logo and wondered if there was still time to repair what he had let crumble. That night, Lucia asked him to tell her a story before bed. He laughed, saying he didn't know how to tell stories. "Then make one up," she insisted. Caleb improvised a fable about a stone man who had learned to feel again. When he finished, he realized how deeply that metaphor affected him. Perhaps the stone man was him, and perhaps, without knowing it, Lucia was saving him little by little. The calm was merely an illusion about to shatter. Caleb noticed small changes, Helena's phone ringing at odd hours, the constant feeling of being watched. That morning, he noticed something different on the security cameras, a black car parked for too long in front of the mansion. "Any problems, sir?" the security guard asked. "Maybe," he replied, his gaze fixed on the screen. During dinner, Helena barely touched her food. Lucia tried to talk, but her mother seemed distracted, looking out the windows as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "He found us," she finally said, her voice trembling. Caleb put down his cutlery. "Who?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Marcus."
That night was the first time Caleb felt fear for someone other than himself. He ordered the security system to be reinforced and that no one be allowed in without authorization. However, the feeling of vulnerability grew. It wasn't just a problem with the cameras, it was personal. Hours later, one of the oldest security guards, Roberto, asked to speak with him. "Mr. Stone, I think it's best to let this woman go. She's posing a danger." Caleb looked at him coldly. "Are you worried about me, Roberto, or about the money Marcus promised you?" The man paled. Caleb fired him on the spot. When the silence returned, he walked through the mansion with his heart ablaze. He felt surrounded, not only by external threats, but by his own feelings that he could no longer contain. Looking into Lucia's room, he saw the girl sleeping soundly, embraced by the cat. For the first time, Caleb admitted to himself he would do anything to protect them. The next morning, Helena appeared at the office door with a determined look on her face. "Lucia and I are leaving. We've caused enough trouble already." Caleb slowly looked up, setting his pen down on the papers. "You're not going anywhere." She insisted. "I don't want you involved. He's dangerous." Caleb stood up, his voice firm. "And you think you'll be safe out there?" Helena hesitated. There was fear in her eyes, but also a painful resignation. "He'll find me. He always does." Caleb approached and said with conviction, "Then let him come, but he won't take you." It was the first moment she believed she was no longer alone. Lucia from the stairs listened to everything in silence. When her mother cried in Caleb's arms, the girl smiled. "I knew you were going to save us," she murmured. The phrase, simple and pure, broke something inside him. For the first time, Caleb felt that perhaps he was fulfilling a purpose he didn't even know existed. In the following days, he hired new security guards and put together a protection plan. Helena and Lucia moved into an annex of the mansion, away from the windows and with restricted access. Caleb reorganized his routine, working from home, which generated rumors among his partners and the press. That night, he went out into the garden and looked at the cloudy sky. The feeling of danger was constant, but there was also a spark of new strength within him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits, contracts, or shareholders. He was thinking about faces, about people, and he understood silently that protecting those two was the only investment that truly mattered. Weeks passed in constant tension. Caleb reviewed recordings, reinforced security, and yet he felt that something was slipping out of his control. Helena seemed more distressed each day, until one afternoon he found her in the basement, hiding a small metal box. "What's this?" he asked, approaching. She hesitated, but finally opened it. Inside, there was a pen drive.
"That's what he wants," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "These files prove that Marcus worked with powerful people, politicians, businessmen, even people connected to his company." Caleb was silent for a few seconds, his gaze fixed on the object. "Are you saying that my partners?" Helena nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "That's why he never let me leave." The revelation hit him like a thunderbolt. Caleb felt betrayed, manipulated, disgusted. Everything he had built was tainted by corruption and violence. "Why didn't you destroy it?" he asked. "Because destroying it doesn't erase the evil," she replied. "The truth needs to be shown." Caleb walked to the window, his gaze lost. All his life, he had believed in the power of control, but here he was, powerless before something much greater.
If this is true, Marcus won't stop, he murmured. Helena simply lowered her head. I know. That's why I thought about running away. That night he sat in his office, staring at the flash drive on his desk. The rain poured outside, and lightning illuminated the billionaire's tense face. For the first time, Caleb Stone understood that his fight wasn't just against a criminal, but against the very system he helped to sustain. The news hit the headlines like a bombshell. Billionaire Caleb Stone is hiding a fugitive in his home. Photos of the mansion, taken from a distance, were published on gossip websites and business newspapers. Helena trembled in front of the television. How did they find out? Caleb turned off the set, his face hardened. Someone sold it to me. Hours later, he received a call from Victor, his old friend and partner. Caleb, have you gone mad? You're harboring a criminal. This will sink the company. Caleb sensed the false tone, overly concerned with profits. You were the one who handed over the photos, weren't you? He asked coldly. On the other end of the line, silence, enough to confirm it. The betrayal hit him hard. Victor, the man he had once trusted blindly, had sold himself in exchange for protection and money. He hung up the phone without saying anything more. The empire he had built was crumbling, and he knew there was no going back. But strangely, he felt no regret, only a strange peace. In the following days, the mansion was surrounded by reporters. Helicopters flew overhead. Lucia cried in secret, afraid of being taken away. Caleb found her in the hallway and knelt before her. No one will take you away from here, okay? I promise. The girl hugged him tightly, without saying a word. That night, he went up to the rooftop and watched the city lights. Everything he owned, businesses, status, power, was beginning to crumble. And yet, for the first time in years, Caleb felt he was fighting for something real. Let it all fall, he murmured to himself, as long as they stay standing.
The following days turned into a whirlwind of chaos and headlines. Caleb Stone, once a symbol of success and power, was now portrayed as an accomplice to a criminal. Investors fled, contracts were canceled, and the company began to crumble before the eyes of the media. Helena watched it all in silence, guilt etched on her face. "This is happening because of me," she would say. Caleb calmly denied it, but the weight gnawed at him from the inside. The mansion gate had become a battleground between reporters and security guards. Shouts, flashes, threats. The house, once silent, now pulsed with the noise of the scandal. Caleb tried to maintain control, but he knew the net was closing in. "They want to destroy you, not just for me, but for everything that pen drive represents," said Helena, holding the object as if it were a bomb about to explode. One night, the police showed up with a warrant. They searched everything, took photos and confiscated documents. Caleb, cold and composed, followed every step without resistance. "We have nothing to hide," he stated, even though he knew that, in the eyes of the world, he was already condemned. Lucia cried in her mother's arms, asking if the man of her dreams would be arrested too. When the cars left, the silence returned, but it was a heavy, suffocating silence. Caleb went up to the office and looked around. The paintings, the awards, the trophies. Everything seemed meaningless. "He can take everything," he said softly, "but they can't take who I've become." It was the first time he had seen failure not as ruin, but as liberation. At dawn, Helena appeared at the door. "We can run away now before it gets worse." Caleb stared at her for a long moment, then replied firmly, "No. If we run away, he wins, and the truth dies with us." The sun was beginning to rise, and with it, the courage Caleb never knew he possessed. News of Caleb's downfall spread,
But Marcus wasn't content to see him destroyed. The criminal wanted the pen drive and Helena. Anonymous messages began arriving, threatening Lucia. "He's closer than you think," one of them said. That's when Caleb realized time had run out. He needed to act. He spent the night awake, plotting a plan. The clock struck 3 in the morning when Helena came downstairs and found him in front of his computer, surrounded by maps and notes. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Setting a trap. I'm going to give the flash drive to Marcus, or at least, that's what he'll think." Helena turned pale. "You can't face him alone." Caleb smiled wearily. "I'm not alone. I'm just paying my debt to society." There was a chilling serenity in his voice, as if he had finally found purpose in his own ruin. The next day, he called Marcus using an untraceable number. "I have what you want, but you're going to listen to me first." The meeting was set for that same night in an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district, the same one where Marcus used to trade weapons and information.
Before leaving, Caleb went to Lucia's room. The girl was fast asleep, her face peaceful. He placed the stuffed cat beside her and whispered, "You were right, little one. I was going to save you. I just didn't know how much it would cost." Then he closed the door, took a deep breath, and set off for the meeting that would define everyone's fate. The night was cold and the wind cut like a blade when Caleb arrived at the warehouse. The hanging lamps flickered, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Marcus awaited him, surrounded by 2 armed henchmen, a mocking smile on his lips. "The soft-hearted billionaire finally decided to get his hands dirty," he taunted. Caleb stepped forward without answering, flash drive in hand. "Here's what you want," Caleb said, tossing the device onto a rusty table. "But first I want guarantees. Leave Helena and Lucia alone." Marcus laughed, the sound echoing loudly in the empty space. "You still believe you can negotiate with me? You're in my world now, Stone." Caleb kept his gaze steady, fear disguised by determination. While Marcus was speaking, Caleb discreetly activated the small recorder hidden in his jacket pocket. The device recorded every word, every confession, every threat. "You destroyed families, corrupted businesses, killed innocent people, and you still think you can get away with it?" the billionaire said, moving closer. Marcus pulled out a gun. "Watch what you say, hero. I've seen men die for far less." Caleb took a deep breath, not backing down. "Maybe I'll die, but not today." At that moment, sirens began to blare in the distance. Marcus looked around, furious. "What did you do?" he shouted. Caleb smiled. It was the sound of the police approaching. Chaos engulfed the warehouse. Marcus tried to escape but was surrounded. Gunshots rang out, glass shattered. One of the henchmen was hit, the other surrendered. Caleb fell to the ground, protecting his head, while the criminal was handcuffed. Amidst the confusion, the recorder was still beeping, recording the end of an empire of lies. When everything fell silent, he closed his eyes, exhausted. For the first time, he felt peace. The headlines changed overnight. Businessman helps police dismantle corruption and influence peddling network. Marcus's recording was broadcast on national television. The truth at last came to light, but the price was high. Caleb lost everything: his companies, his possessions, his reputation. Even so, he walked lightly, as if he had left the weight of the world behind. Helena and Lucia watched the news together, crying. "He did this for us," said Helena, hugging her daughter tightly to her chest. The next day, they went to Caleb's house. He was sitting in the garden, looking peaceful, watching the sunrise. "You are safe," he said, before they could say a word. Helena tried to thank him, but her voice failed her. "There's nothing to thank me for," he replied. "You gave me something money could never buy: meaning." Lucia approached
and handed him the stuffed cat. "Now it's truly yours." Caleb smiled, his eyes welling up with tears. "I think it always was."
A few days later, Helena and Lucia left for another city, under police protection. Caleb accompanied them to the gate, watching as the car disappeared down the road. The silence that remained was not one of loneliness, but of a new beginning. In the following months, Caleb sold what remained of his belongings and began working anonymously for an NGO focused on women and children at risk. The man who once lived surrounded by luxury now lived among ordinary people, and for the first time, he felt whole. When he saw the sunset reflected in the shelter's windows, he remembered Lucia saying, "I dreamt that you were going to save us." And he smiled, because he understood that, in some way, she had saved him too. Time passed like the gentle breeze of a new season. Months had turned into a calm routine, and Caleb now lived in a small house near the shelter he helped manage. He woke up early, had coffee watching the children play outside, and was surprised to realize that, for the first time, the silence no longer bothered him. It was a silence of peace, not of loneliness. One autumn day, while organizing papers in the NGO's office, a letter caught his eye. The envelope was plain, with no return address, but the name Mr. Stone was written in childish handwriting. He opened it curiously, and upon reading the first few lines, felt his heart race. It was from Lucia. "Dear Mr. Caleb, Mom and I are doing well. We have a new home and a new life. I'm studying music now, and it helps people like us. Mom says you saved us, but I think we saved ourselves together. And I dreamed again. I dreamed that you were still going to help many people." He smiled, tears beginning to fall. Inside the envelope, there was also an invitation. It was for the inauguration of a foundation bearing his name, Stone Institute of Hope. On the edge of the paper, a small drawing made by Lucia showed three figures holding hands under a bright sun. On the day of the event, he arrived discreetly, without a suit, without flashes. The simple building was full of smiling children and families. When Lucia saw him, she ran to him, her face lighting up. "I knew you would come," she said, hugging him tightly. Helena approached soon after, her eyes brimming with tears. "None of this would exist without you." Caleb looked around and felt an emotion he couldn't name. Everything he had lost seemed insignificant compared to what he had gained: purpose, connection, love. "Actually," he replied with a slight smile, "you're the ones who taught me how to exist again." When he stepped onto the small stage to speak, he hesitated for a moment. He wasn't a man of speeches, but the words came naturally. "I spent my life believing that money was power.
Today, I know that true power is extending a hand when someone is falling, even if you are also on the ground." The audience applauded him, and Helena held Lucia's hand, moved. Caleb took a deep breath, gazing at the orange sunset sky. That same sky he once observed from the balcony of his old mansion, empty, now seemed full of promise. At the end of the ceremony, Lucia pulled him by the arm and whispered, "I think my dream isn't over yet." He smiled and replied, "That's good." As they walked together across the courtyard, the wind lifted golden leaves around them, and for the first time since it all began, Caleb no longer saw himself as the man who had saved 2 lives, but as someone who had finally been saved by them. Caleb lost everything money could buy and found everything his heart needed. If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel now, and activate the notification bell, because here, every story is a reminder
that hope always finds a way. And remember, sometimes the person you save is the one who saves you back.